My guest today is Paul Williams from the 50 Gut blog. He is a content creator, a podcast host, and somebody I truly respect in the Commanders content space. Make sure you check out all his work. Today, we talked about fandom, new ownership, and hopefully a little bit of what we'll see on the field this year. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure that you subscribe, like, and leave us some comments. Your feedback is always appreciated. And now, my interview with Paul Williams. All right, Paul Williams. Paul, how are you today?
Good, man. Good, Doug. Thanks for having me on. Much appreciated. Excited to talk some shop with you, man.
Absolutely. The host of the 50 Gut blog. Tell me, it's interesting. On Twitter, it's the 50 Gut blog. On Instagram, it's the 50 Gut pod. I know it's a podcast now. Did it start out as a blog or has it always been a podcast?
No, it was just a blog back in the blogging days when people still actually wrote and read things. We were just three buddies that like to write about the Skins. And as time moved on, we're like, nobody's reading these. We need to actually talk about it. And I'm sure in 20 years, we'll still be doing the same thing. But in whatever platform they've moved to at that point. So, yeah, we've done a little bit of both.
What was the original plan when you switched from the blog to the podcast?
Well, just to kind of cast a wider net. We got such good positive feedback on our writing, and people were engaging in it and wanted more. So we were like, man, we could kind of hit a bigger target audience if we start cranking out some shows and get some fan feedback. And we just kind of went from there.
There are three of you, if I'm correct, right? You guys were longtime buddies. You met through being fans of the team. How did the three of you become a podcast?
Well, my man Corey, shout out to Corey Gassaway. I've actually known him since kindergarten. We're best friends back when Joe Gibbs 1 was still doing this thing and we were winning Super Bowls. And we've been complaining about the Skins and the Commanders and the Washington football team for the past 35 years. Cliff, I met in college, same sort of deal. Like we were buddies that we linked up one summer and we were like, hey, are you a fan of this football team? Like, yeah, of course I am. And we've been sharing in misery ever since. And then one day in my basement, I think around like 2011, 2012, we were like, you know what? We have such great hot takes. We should get this on wax and start recording these. Like, that's a good idea. Let's do that.
I'm curious how you would describe it. I mean, this podcast is more of an interview nature. There are others that are simply dissecting the plays and how it affects the team. If you were describing the podcast to somebody that hasn't listened to it hasn't listened to it before, what is the vibe that you'd say?
I'd say it's like more of a barbershop style. Like you kind of walk in and you hear like a bunch of dudes just kind of rapping about the team, not really spitting statistics or advanced analytics. Like there are other podcasts that do that and they do it very well. But we try to stay in our lane and just be like, hey, if people want to hear us like three angry old guys yell in a microphone, that's really for you. If you want to something a little bit more like technical, Keim, Finley, Standing, all those guys out there that have the advanced stats, we're more like low key and just angry man yells at cloud vibe sort of thing.
The podcast, you've had the podcast for a while now. Mm-hmm. What do you think has been the biggest change since you started the podcast to now?
I mean, a lot of the things that we had to change to kind of evolve with the times, like, just like the technical side, like lighting, photo, video quality, moving from platform to platform and see who has the best accommodations for your podcast. But in terms of what we personally had to do as podcasters, we kind of had to just listen to ourselves and kind of understand our tone and trying to find our voice and trying not to like be more than we are, just kind of like having our niche crew of listeners and try to cater to them and not try to be bigger than what we are.
When it comes to the team, do you find yourself more of a optimist or a pessimist? And does that translate to your regular life? Are you generally an optimist or a pessimist? And has that changed over the years because of the team that you root for?
I'm a pretty optimistic person, and I find that carries over into my fanhood. I'm pretty optimistic about the team. I try to have measured optimism because I've been burned. We all have been burned way too many times in the past, putting our full faith behind this team and the people that run it. I tend to like skew a little bit positive, even though my positivity had been waning over the past I don't know, 2 decades while Dan's running the team, but still a pretty positive person. And I am a fan of what we're building as a team right now. And I think that they're finally turning around and building something better than we've had here in a while.
Seems like at this point, new ownership is not likely, but inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
What do you hope that we'll see? What do you hope that the franchise will look like once new ownership is in place?
I hope to just be, I don't want us to sound like I'm not proud to be a fan of this team. I'm very proud of the burgundy and gold in my fanhood of 30, 35 years. But I want to be proud of this team again. You know that with Daniel Snyder running the show, there's always a scandal lurking around the corner. There's been countless issues with him between fans and media and players, and just kind of a bad taste in everybody's mouth for the longest time. And I'm kind of just looking forward to just saying, yeah, I'm a Commanders fan, I'm a Washington fan, and you know, I could take the losing, but the constant embarrassment and the constant, you know, having to like hide your face and like pretend like you're not like gung ho with the team is kind of sucks. I'm looking forward to being like really proud to say I'm a Commanders fan again, and just you know, just going back to the stadium and buying gear and feel like you know, it's okay to support the team again.
It's a kick in the pants with all the off the field stuff. Like I'm with you. The winning stinks. You can get over that, I think, if you feel like the players are out there giving it their all and busting their humps.
Right.
It's the constant, you know, negativity surrounding that I think will leave, and we'll be able to breathe again.
Right.
Maybe is the best way to look at it, right? We get that exhale and breathe again. I'm curious, Paul, you know, from the time that we heard that the Redskins was out, you know, the name was gone from the football team, now to the Commanders, where do you kind of sit with all of it? How do you parse it out?
Well, you know, it'll never be the same. I think that I've kind of started to accept that. And no matter how much I fall in love with the Commanders and that brand, it'll never be the team I grew up with. It'll never be the team that, you know, I made so many memories with my grandfather and my dad, like going to RFK, and even like through the 90s and the 2000s, like going to see Clinton Portis and Santana Moss and Cooley and those guys. The fight song is gone. It's just, there's an era of kind of, it's almost like a expansion franchise almost. You have to make a decision within yourself. Am I going to be a fan of this expansion franchise and try to keep some traditions alive? And, you know, within myself, I made that decision that I wanted to do that because they still are the same team. You know, the nuts and bolts and the studs of this franchise are still the same. And it's still the team I love. Just got to get used to just not being what they were, and looking forward to what they can be in the future. In
the end, they're the home team.
Right, exactly. As long as they're,
it could be the DC home team, right? You root for the home team. That's how I've always looked at it. At least is that, yeah, I think they could have come up with something better than Commanders, certainly.
No doubt, no doubt.
Up with something better than the Wizards too.
Exactly. And the
like,
question
I was
is,
way more upset about the Wizards name than I was about the Commanders name, if I'm being completely honest.
Wizards could have been Sea Dogs, though. It could always be worse. And I think that Commanders fans should remember that, because it could always be worse. Commanders is boring as hell, and they could have done better. But
we could be the Washington Monuments right now, right?
Doug, stop playing.
So I'm with you. And I hope more of the fan base will come around on the idea that while the history is not gone, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think, I'd push back a little bit on the expansion team, because while, yes, there are not very many things that audibly may connect you to whatever Redskins is, I won't forget those Super Bowls. I won't forget the players that played for the team. I won't forget the great memories of going to games with my brother. That's the franchise. To me, right. That's not the name. It's not the logo. It's not the owner. To me, the owner was always just the steward of the franchise until his time was over. And eventually, right. Whether he'd have kept it all of his life or not, or retired, whatever, one day the franchise will still exist, and all those things will have changed. So I hope people can move on with the idea that we're still rooting for the home team. We've still got all those memories. Nobody can take those from you. The name had to go. I understand why a lot of people didn't like Commanders. I've been asking around. I'm curious actually as to how much Dan Snyder actually played. Like there are a lot of people that said, "Oh, Dan Snyder gave us one more middle finger out the door with the Commanders." I'm curious, and I've asked around. I'm hoping some of the people that are closer to the organization will tell me exactly. Did Dan Snyder really say, "I like the Commanders. We're going Commanders"? Or was that more like a group of people and maybe some people from the league that said, this is the safest pick, why not go this route? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, I don't think that any one person can make a decision like that by themselves. It is as sometimes small-minded as Dan Snyder has been and can be. I don't think that he would unilaterally make a decision like that. Like, I'm going to just rebrand this. I mean, he hired people to kind of guide him along the way. Was it the right people to guide him? I mean, we don't know. I mean, whose decision is that to make? I also keep in mind that no matter what they change the name to, like we mentioned earlier, I mean, it's not going to be the Redskins, and people would have found it, a little bit corny, no matter what the name was, whether Dan picked it or not. Like if I told you right now that Jason Wright picked the name, do you think people would hate it less or more? I mean, I don't think so.
I think it would be an interesting question to ask people, right? Like how much. And the other interesting thing is I remember having Craig Hoffman on a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about, Dan and before Lamar got signed, right? And it was like, Dan be the ultimate person to just give him a fully guaranteed contract that the league didn't want him to get on his way out the door as another FU. And I remember Craig saying, yeah, but when you talk to people inside the building, what people still forget is for all of Dan's mistakes, for all of the loathsome things that he did, he was born a fan. He will sell the team as a fan. Mm-hmm. And he would have never, even though it feels hard to believe this, he didn't do any of those things with ill intent to the franchise. I think he just was an idiot and didn't understand how to do his job, right? Because he loved the franchise. So this idea that he named them the Commanders to spite the organization on his way out the door, I think is way off base and out of line. Just my opinion.
Yeah,
are you a season ticket holder?
I am not. And, kind of a sidebar, that's one of the things I'm looking forward to doing now that Dan is gone. I mean, I was kind of really on the fence about whether I'd get season tickets. I know my dad personally gave up his season tickets maybe like 15 years ago. He just wasn't a fan of the FedEx experience, wasn't a fan of Dan Snyder. The team was losing. He was like, I'm just giving it up. But I'm looking forward to buying season tickets. Now I have a son. Maybe one day he's into the team. We can go to games together, hopefully to get a new stadium built sometime in the near future. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to going back to games for sure. 25
or 26, I think, is when they'll have to start building a new stadium. Sounds like more and more it's likely back in D.C., which I think to me is one of the biggest things they can do, right?
Absolutely.
They can do one thing for the fan base. It feels like that's it.
I had said for a long time that if Daniel Snyder could get the team back in D.C., not that all would be forgiven, but that would be such a boost for his just approval ratings amongst the fan base, I guess you'd say. I mean, like, that's the one thing that's Jack Kent Cooke couldn't even get back in D.C. when he was trying to build a new place in 97. If Daniel Snyder could have pulled that off and put it right back at RFK, around the waterfront, get some storefronts and some, a hotel, casino, whatever, or even just the stadium would have been a big deal to the fans, for sure.
Yes, and it sounds promising. Mm-hmm. I've been asking people this, Paul, and I haven't quite got. I think maybe I've been asking the question the wrong way because I haven't quite gotten the answer I was looking for. So I've been asking people to sit in Rivera's shoes as the new ownership comes in, and the answer to this, and explain why you should keep your job. Like steel man, the conversation, as they say. Mm-hmm. And what I get is, well, he's got to win he's got to go win 10 games and win a playoff game. Well, no, that's what he's got to do to keep his job while they're playing football. What I'm trying to get is, can you make if you're Ron Rivera sitting in that meeting, how do you make the case for him as Ron Rivera? What do you say to new ownership? Is the plan, is the vision to keep the job?
I think that his vision to keep this job would be to sell that they have a good enough team behind what they've built and Sam Howell that they could not only be competitive in the NFC East, but be competitive in the playoffs once they get there. I know that he's swung and missed on quarterbacks a few times since he's been here. There's no question about it. Every time. He is like 0 for 6 at this point. Unfortunately, I mean, some of it's not his fault. Alex Smith wasn't his fault. Case Keenum wasn't his fault. But, you know, you haven't found the guy. It's been 3 years, and you've had a lot of turnover there. But if they have some success with Howell, right, I think that the basement for him, he has to be at least a tier above what Heineke gave you last year. And even if it's Brissett to a degree, I think that you could kind of like, hey, the team is so good that even Jacoby Brissett could do this, right? And you got to really sell what you've done, what you've built around them. Because, you know, you find a quarterback, easier said than done. Understandably, he hasn't done it yet. But I think that if you could sell that, like you built something great and you could find a quarterback that's just a tier above what you were getting in the past, that you could be a competitive team.
If the new ownership came in and said, Ron, we like what you're doing, but we don't like the coach-centric approach, what do you think? How easy is it, do you think it is for a man like Ron Rivera to say, okay, then bring it, you know, you just want me to coach, that's fine, bring in. You think he'd move backwards that way? Is it moving backwards if you're still keeping your head coaching job?
That's a tough question to answer. I'll put it like this. I don't think that Ron's going to coach again after he leaves here, whether that's next year, 3 years, 5 years. I think this is his last head coaching gig. He's a man that's approaching, I think he's mid-60s. He probably wants to retire, but he wants to see.
Early 60s. I looked it up the other day.
Early 60s, right. So he probably wants to see, you know, this thing through and then just kind of, you know, head off into the sunset and retire, you know. I think that he has some work to do. And I think that he's built some good things around here. And I think that fans got to give him more credit for the team that he's built. I know people always say, oh, we had nowhere to go but up, right? In 2019, the roster was bad. They only won 3 games. But, you know, we have to give him credit. Like, he's found some diamonds in the rough. And I think that the coach-centric approach, the one allows him to kind of keep an eye on the personnel and an eye on development. You know, I've had a kind of a suspicion for a while that, you know, Jack does his thing on defense. Now Eric Bieniemy will do his thing on offense, and he's kind of the CEO of all of it. Like, he's not really finger on the pulse, like head coach, like the typical head coach kind of role. But I think he kind of is more of an overseer. If they ask him to relinquish that, I think that he might, just because he wants to stay in the game and he wants to see this thing through. And I think he's built enough to this point where he would be like, okay, it's not like the same stranglehold I've had on the team before, but I'm still like steering the wheel of this car to a degree.
I've often said the same exact thing. I think it's interesting that you said the CEO, because that's kind of exactly how he's run this thing, right? He's found really smart people and put them in positions to succeed and let them do their thing. And I think in that way it works, and I dig it. I don't always think that, you know, the job of a GM, I've said this several times on the podcast, and I think it's just because I believe it so intensely. The job of a GM is to prepare the team for the future.
Right.
And the job of the head coach is to win football games right now. And I think it's hard to hit that intersection perfectly where you are prepping the team for the future, but also knowing you have to win games now.
Yeah.
In some way, it's got to affect the way you make decisions on both sides of your job. And that's probably why there's, you know, Bill Belichick's the only guy still doing it. Even Andy Reid asked for a GM when he went to the Chiefs. Now, he may have picked that GM himself, but it's a lot of work, and the two don't jive very well together.
Right. And that's part of the reason why I kind of believe that that's what's actually happened. I mean, like, whether some of the fans want to admit it or not, like I've said, like the roster has improved quite a bit. Right. And I think that some fans are a little bit impatient because Ron is more of a, you know, a draft and develop sort of guy. We talk about like Derek Forrest, for example, who's taken a big jump between 1 and 2. Jamin Davis, the same thing, between 1 and 2. He made a jump, and you'll probably see another jump next year. So that kind of like, you know, we got to see the vision. We got to see what Ron sees and kind of like wait it out. But, you know, that doesn't jive with a lot of fans. Fans want that kind of instant gratification. I don't blame them. They want to know that this thing's going in the right direction. Sometimes it takes some time to get there.
To his credit, he probably should have gotten off Scott Turner a little bit earlier. Easier to see that, when you're looking backwards.
Yeah.
If that's my biggest maybe thought of his biggest mistake, what in your mind has been Ron's biggest mistake since he's been here?
Ron's biggest mistake since he's been here. I would say, I mean, this is the kind of easy answer: the failure to find a quarterback. He hasn't been given like the greatest chance to like acquire one. Like you were never drafting in the top, I take that back. I guess you did draft Chase Young, but I will say to everybody, you had Dwayne Haskins. That summer before that Chase got drafted, Chase was the guy. The only reason why he went to is because Burrow went nuclear. I don't blame him that year for not getting a quarterback. But once that flamed out, that should have been your only priority, your biggest priority. And the fact that you haven't gotten it, haven't even come close. Fitzpatrick, whatever. Like that was a weird situation from the get-go. And this man hurt his hip on a water slide, allegedly. Then you traded picks and bid against yourself and took on a full contract of Carson Wentz when you didn't have to. It's clearly his biggest swing and miss. And the fact that you haven't come close to figuring it out is kind of a big indictment on him and letting him pick a quarterback going forward.
They had the opportunity to trade one extra first to move up for Justin Fields. To me, that will be his biggest mistake. They could have reset right then and moved on. It would have cost him, I guess, Jahan Dotson the following year, I guess is the pick you give up for that. But if Justin Fields is the guy, you'd have easily given up Jahan Dotson for that because you just have to have him. That's been their problem. Imagine going 500 with a sub 500 quarterback, which is what they've done since Ron's been here. It's been fairly incredible, really. Who's got the better chance of making it through the season, Ron or Jason Wright?
I think that they're very much tied to the hip. But I would say I'd say Ron, only because if a new owner comes in, they can hire a new team president. Not to say that Jason Wright hasn't done a good job or he hasn't been influential in his job, but they might have a different idea of who they want a team president to be. But Ron holds his future in his hands. If Ron wins this year, he's not going anywhere. They're going to keep him, right? That's a big if. He may not do that good. Maybe he's just average. Average isn't good enough to save his job. But if he wins and wins big, like goes to the playoffs and wins 11 games, Ron's not going to go anywhere. Jason Wright, I mean, who knows? He might be here, he might not be. It just really depends on what the preference of the new owner is going to be.
What were your three biggest takeaways from this recent draft?
That they turned the secondary from a place of somewhat weakness and no depth into a position of strength, right? Number two is that they got a few depth pieces at defensive end, something they desperately needed. Whether you think that they made a mistake trading it for KJ Henry or not, that's a guy that you're going to need moving forward, especially if you don't bring back the Two Hills or the Jason Smith-Williams of the world. You need a guy there. And I'll take away that I'm surprised they didn't draft a third quarterback. I know that they picked one up as an undrafted free agent, but I was almost certain they would draft one of these guys day three, like a Jake Haener or a Jaron Hall out of BYU, somebody that they could have behind Brissett, just as a third quarterback. I was surprised they didn't, to be honest with you.
It was interesting when they drafted Emmanuel Forbes in the first round. I remember thinking to myself, who's the slot man? It almost forced them to take the slot in the second round because, for my money, Kendall Fuller's days in the slot are done. I keep hearing people say that they just moved Fuller back in the slot. Well, no, they had done that last year, right? They wanted St. Juice outside and William Jackson III outside. Now, that's a whole different story. Yeah. But the plan was to have Fuller inside, and he was terrible. I mean, he couldn't do it. They had to move him back outside. Remember, they were forcing St. Juice into the slot, and he's not a slot man. He needs the boundary for help, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's why some guys are outside and not inside guys. Right. So it was like they had forced themselves into taking a slot corner because they use one so often. I think they found a really good one. It feels like they took a weakness and really turned it into a strength in that draft.
Right. And if you look at the youth of that room now, I mean, Quan Martin is 23. Forrest is 23, Curl's 24, Benjamin St. Just is 25, Forbes is 23, Percy Butler is 23 years old. The ripe old age of Kendall Fuller is the oldest person in the room at age 28.
28.
So, right. And like, remember last year versus the Eagles when we had Rashad Wild Goose and I think Tariq Fields, I forget his name even, guarding Devontae Smith because we had no depth there. Like now you have 4 good cornerbacks. I mean, I don't really know much about Denzel. What's his name? Denzel, the kid from Minnesota.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, I don't know if he's going to stick around, but you have 4 solid cornerbacks, especially if you keep Fuller, that can round out that group, and you can go toe to toe with just about anybody. After just figuring out what you're going to do with the personnel there.
I hear on Twitter all the time that it's time to let go of Kendall Fuller. I'd suggest that's crazy because, to your point, what's the depth? Like, what are you saving the money for? People are always like, well, take them for the cap savings. Okay, for who? Who are you getting? What are you saving the money for? Where are you at on Kendall Fuller and this idea that they can cut him now if they drafted 2 new corners?
Like you said, why? I mean, like, I like the youth, but they are young. You don't get experience by just being on the field for a couple of plays. You kind of gain experience by having somebody in your ear kind of guiding you along the way, showing you how to do it. And Kendall Fuller's been around the block. He's a 6-year vet, a Super Bowl champion. Like, he's a fan of the coaching staff. He has a big voice in the locker room. I think that it'd be wise to keep him around for the young guys and just show them the ropes and show them how to be, good defensive backs in the NFL. I wouldn't understand why you do that. And you kind of compromise your depth at the same time. It just doesn't make sense.
It blows my mind every time I think about the idea that Kendall Fuller's 28 years old. I mean, it feels like he's been in the league forever. I guess maybe it's the beard and the afro. He looks like he's about 32, 33.
I always forget.
And he just turned 28 too. It was like he was 27 a couple months ago.
I forget that we drafted him so young. Like, he was a young 20, like a 20 in a few months we drafted him. So the fact that he's 28 years old, I'm like, you've been in the league for like 13 years. How is this even possible? It's just, he's been around, but not that long. Longer than our own imaginations in actuality. If
we're keeping Fuller for depth and to lead what, to your point, is an extremely young room, can't the same thing be said for Logan Thomas?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a guy that was a quarterback, for a good portion of his career, a guy who was kind of like learning on the fly and just kind of learning like the position, he could probably pass along a few like, okay, well, Amari Rodgers, you were a quarterback, but you have the same kind of profile to be a great tight end that I had. This is how I did it, right? A couple of younger tight ends like Cole Turner. I know that like the guy Hodges out of Arizona State, they're not great blockers, but you found a guy that turned himself into a great blocker kind of on the fly. He has like these jewels that you can pass down to the younger group that's going to help him develop quicker and become NFL tight ends instead of just hopeful NFL tight ends.
Amari Rodgers is super high on my show out list. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was trying to show out last year, and some injuries and other things kind of held him back. But he's got what it takes to be that shift guy in the modern NFL. I mean, he is what, to me, every team in the league is looking for. And I think he's getting ready to get busy this year.
I can see it, man. He is he has all the tools. He's fast. He's big. He's physical. Way more physical than I thought an ex-quarterback would be. But I guess if you watched him at Ohio, running Wildcat as a quarterback, looking like Cam Newton, you would know that he likes to lower his shoulder a little bit. But like you said, like an undrafted guy that has every tool in the bag, you just kind of, sand the edges and refine them a little bit and see what you get. But I guarantee that Eric Bieniemy has a plan for him because he has everything you would want tight end to have.
Assuming that Norwell gets cut, and I think at this point it's just when, not if. Is the line good enough? Does it scare you? I mean, I guess is the way we're looking at it from left to right now. Is Charles Leno, either Sadiq Charles or Chris Paul, Gates at center, looks like Cosme at right guard and Wiley at right tackle. You got a kid playing quarterback that's only got one start under his belt. It's proven that the offensive line doesn't have to be great, but it's got to be good enough. I mean, is this line good enough?
To be seen, to be determined. I think that they definitely got more athletic, which is great. You know, if you think about last year and how we couldn't run a regular screen pass because Andrew Norwell and Trey Turner and Nick Martin have the foot speed of a wet paper bag, so you couldn't really do anything like that. I think they were all good run blockers, but I think that you need a little bit more, athleticism in the interior to do some of the things, especially things that Eric Bieniemy might want to do. I worry about the pass blocking. I am because, Andrew Wiley was, while he was an NFL Super Bowl champion and started 3 seasons for KC, like he gave up a lot of sacks. And I think Leno needs to play better. And I think he is better than what he showed last year, but he gave a bunch of sacks. You have 3 young guys in the interior. I like Nick Gates. I think that he could compete with Stromberg for that starting center job. But you have a lot of youth and a lot of guys who gave up a lot of sacks in the past. And you have a young quarterback that could be a problem. But I do like the athleticism. I think that they can do a little more creative play calling, something that maybe that Scott Turner wasn't afforded the chance to do, which can kind of alleviate some of the problems. But I think they have they have something to figure out, I think.
You mentioned the play calling. Is this the year that we finally get the production from Gibson that the fan base has been clamoring for years? Will Bieniemy be the guy that finally unlocks this guy's potential?
I'll say this: if he can't do it, then I don't think anybody can. I try to give him a little bit of grace because he is moving from running back or from wide receiver to running back, and we always forget that. And while we're like, well, it's year 4, how long is it going to take? Well, doesn't always work out for everybody. It doesn't always work out for everybody. Some people can't make the change. I will say this: I think, especially with the fact that we drafted Chris Rodriguez, another power back, to pair with Brian Robinson, I think they have a plan for Gibson. I think that while he isn't as explosive as we had thought maybe in the past, but I think that he could absolutely be a great kind of like a split out option from the backfield, like a third down back sort of thing. Like we've seen
McKissick role.
Right, exactly. We've seen flashes of him being able to do it. I think about the Bills game from 2 years ago. I think about the Jags game from last year when he did a lot of great things. I think they hadn't committed to it the way that they needed to actually make the change. But now that he's the only real receiving threat of these 3 backs that figure to make the team, that he's going to be the guy, and they're going to give him every chance to do so. So they unlocked the way that he should have been used from day one. As far as a power back, I think his days as a power back are over, but I think that he could actually do some more helpful things for the team for sure.
I'm glad that his days as a power back are over. I don't think he was ever suited for it. It was like, It reminded me of when they brought in Clinton Portis, right? And told him, we need you to put on 20 pounds and be a power back because that's what we're going to run here. I hope they tell Antonio Gibson to lose 10, 15 pounds.
Right.
And get back into that shifty. I mean, because he does not look as fast and as explosive here as he did when you put on the tape from college. He just doesn't. And to me, that's because he had to put on weight to be able to run through the tackles. Absolutely. And to your point, he's not going to be asked to run through the tackles very much this year, I don't think, particularly with Rodriguez, who I'm a big fan of, by the way. I think people are underestimating how good he was at Kentucky. Yeah,
I mean, to be honest with you, I knew very little about him when they drafted him. I just kind of heard that he was a power back. After I, did a little research on him and read up a little about him, I know that Eric Bieniemy had a 3rd round grade on him. Or at least that's what we heard. I think I heard Scott McCloughan on This Morning with Time, and he said a 2nd round grade on Chris Rodriguez. And I know that he had gotten into trouble during his time at Kentucky, which is not really what Ron Rivera goes for. But I heard that Eric Bieniemy was really high on him, and I kind of trust his acumen to get a running back. You see what they did with Pacheco last year as an undrafted guy that was a very unheralded, ended up being a key cog in a Super Bowl run. I think that if Chris Rodriguez is what Eric Bieniemy thinks he is, that he can be a good asset to have and a good running mate for Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson for sure.
Were you surprised they didn't give the 5th-year option to Chase Young?
I was. I'm less surprised. Now that I've kind of had time to digest it, financially, it didn't make sense to extend him or give the 5th-year option before he had a chance to prove that he could be an $18 million a year guy. And I think that if you have him have a season that they hope that he's going to have, that they could probably bring him back for a 2 or 3 year deal that's more in line with his value. it kind of sucks because he's the second overall pick and you wanted to see that work out, and you kind of like kept waiting for him to turn that corner and be like, see, I told you that he was worth paying. But the time came where you had to make a decision, and I don't think they were fully convinced, obviously. And, I hope he does his thing this year and we can actually look back and be like, man, that was worrisome, but I'm glad he actually got it together.
Yeah, because it's not just the injury. I mean, he hadn't played well before the injury.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I thought they'd still give him the 5th-year option. I was surprised that they didn't. More, I guess, just because that's just what you do, right? You draft a guy 2nd overall, you give him the 5th-year option and assume that he'll be getting better. What kind of year do you think it takes? I mean, I kind of feel like we're going to get one of these Daron Payne years from Sweat this year. And I think they'll pay him, which then means, I guess, to keep the band together, if you wanted to, you could then franchise tag Chase for a year. Do you think it's necessary to keep the band together? Do you think they want to keep the band together as far as those 4 defensive linemen that they've kind of built this thing around?
I think they'd prefer to keep the band together feasibly. I don't know if it's possible, but I did hear all year. We all heard all year that they weren't going to bring Payne back. We were sure they weren't going to bring Payne back. And he had a great year. You had no choice. He kind of forced their hand. I think they would be pleasantly surprised if Chase Young forced their hand too. Like, well, we have to keep him now. I think that we could expect to have a bounce back year from him. I mean, he tore his ACL and they had to remove tendons from the other knee. Just like 18 months ago. Of course, he wasn't going to look great last year, but I think that now that he knows that, hey, it's put up or shut up time. Either I have a good season or I'm going to be gone. And he still is a young guy who's very explosive, very athletic. I think he has some things to develop in his pass rush game. And I think that he understands that he needs to do that. Not only that, he needs to have a little more maturity. You've heard the rumblings that, Ron wasn't happy that he wasn't in camp and that, he wasn't in OTAs and he hasn't been the leader that they expect him to be. I think he steps up into that role now because I think he understands how important he is to this defense and kind of being the heartbeat and being the guy that the other guys look to on the defensive line for sure.
In what is extremely, way too early to be having this conversation, I'll ask you, who gets more starts next year at quarterback, Howell or Brissett?
I mean, I hope it's Howell. I hope it's Howell. I don't think they'll have a hesitation to have a quick hook if Howell shows that he's not the guy. That being said, I think Howell's gonna show out. I don't know if he's gonna be some dynamic quarterback off Bucks, but I think that he has enough weapons around him and enough, good coaches around him, and I think that he's capable of having a good season. I don't think that they're gonna pull him if he's just kind of fleshing it out. I think that if he'll get hooked, it's clear that he's not the guy off rip, but I don't think that's going to be the case.
The key will be, and it'll be unfortunate for everybody, but history has shown us that Ron gets off to incredibly slow starts. Everywhere he's been, all the way back to Carolina. Most of the time, you're looking at 1-3, 2-4 starts. And I just wonder, I don't think he's got one of those starts in him this year with new ownership coming in. I don't know why. Maybe you have an idea as to why they routinely get off to slow starts. But I tell you this, you can't afford it this year.
Yeah, you most definitely cannot. The good way, it's not a good look for your new bosses when you're starting the season 1-4 again for the 3rd year in a row. And this is something that has been happening since Gruden was here. Gruden had a few 1-3, 1-4 starts. Maybe it's just us. I don't understand it. But I don't know what the fix is. They happen to turn it around mid-season, and that's been the case since he was in Carolina. The teams just turn around somewhere around Halloween. They kick hard towards the end. Maybe it's something they're doing in camp they need to do differently. Maybe there needs to be a more renewed focus during camp and a reluctance to kind of in the dog days of summer kind of take days off and be complacent in your practice and your rituals. I think they got to just understand that there's a lot of jobs on the line here. The entire front office, coaching staff can be wiped out if y'all don't do your thing. So I think they have to keep that in mind.
Do you generally go to OTAs? Are you going this year?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be there again. I taken like a year off or a couple of years off when they're down in Richmond. I never made it down there, but now that they're back in the area, I for sure will be out there for sure.
Paul, it's been too long since we did this. I'm so glad we were able to get our schedules worked together. I will make sure that it's not this long since we do it again. I know that you guys have taken some time off. Tell the folks at home like what's coming up with the podcast and when it drops and what they can expect.
Yeah, we are. Well, right now we're doing once a week. We're just a once a week pod, but we are typically a 3 times a week pod come like training camp in the season. We hope to start cranking out a lot more content here in the next coming weeks and setting up our YouTube show, which we've been trying to do for like 2 years now. Haven't had a chance to do that. But every Monday in the summer, it'll be Wednesdays and Fridays as well. Check us out on Twitter at 50 Gut Blog, on Instagram at 50 Gut Podcast, also on TikTok at 50 Gut Blog.
One of my favorites on Twitter and in the content space, man. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks, Doug. Much appreciated, bro.